Hello everybody and welcome back to another one of those videos where I talk about updates on Dwarf Fortress coming from Toady1 and KitFox. This one was fascinating because it mostly was Toady1, and then KitFox announced a different game. And so for the first few hours, all we had was the post on Bay 12. So that's what I'm working off of, but the Steam post is up now as well. This one is one of those patches that I think really matters because a lot of old things have been fixed, a lot of things have been tweaked, bugs from the Lua update have also been fixed, you can generate new worlds now, and we also got a quietly massive new feature, which makes an old feature a lot more usable. Let's dive in. This is a release to continue to stabilize the Lua update. There are several regular fixes as well, listed below in the patch notes. Also, we have some dye improvements for you. You can now mix dyes to produce a variety of colors. You can tint with the dyes to mix natural colors of the material and the color of the dye during the dyeing process. If you make a new world, you'll also have access to some additional outdoor plant dyes. Leather can now be dyed, and there are now new stockpile controls to help you manage all of the new stuff. If you want to see your dwarves in their new outfits, and of course, if you would like to toggle the colors of their clothing after you make them some fancy new outfits, you can do that by swapping this little setting here in the options menu. It'll swap them from using the job colors, as they naturally would, to the colors of their clothing, which is very confusing if you're trying to actually play the game, but gives you an idea of just how much effect the dyes are having on your fortress. Now let's read the actual patch notes. While I read these, I'm going to show some footage of the new dye processes. They added dye mixing, which allows you to take any of the combinations of the dyes that pre-exist and mix them together to create new colors. This gets a little ridiculous kind of quickly. They added dyeing of leather, which allows you to obviously dye leather and increase the value of it alongside of clothing. They added partial dyeing of items, meaning you can now tint items, which uses less dye than if you were to completely dye an item, adding less value, but then you could re-dye it with a new color to dye your dyed leather and dye the dye leather so that it tints the leather a different dyed color. Work with me here. They've added 60 new outdoor plant dyes. These are not new plants, these are plants that already existed that now have new uses. As an example, spinach makes this beautiful pink color. Leather, cloth, armor, and finished goods stockpiles can now filter by color and dye status. So you can filter by colored or not colored, allowing you to very easily sort your stocks of thread and fabric into dyed and not dyed piles. They added additional natural colors to undyed cloth, thread, and leather descriptions, meaning it'll just say it's brown or it's silver or whatever color the cloth naturally is. And they added dye color to the dye descriptions. It's kind of a mess, but honestly, this is quietly a really good feature. And the reason I think this improvement is actually a big improvement is because it overhauls the entirety of the industry and also largely the clothing industry as well. These are a lot of features that the stockpiles have needed for a long time, and it's great that they now have them. As far as the dyeing different colors thing goes, this really feels like a feature that Tarn just kind of put together in a weekend and prototyped out over a little period of time in his head, and then just implemented on a lark. This doesn't seem like something that used a lot of time, but I think is going to flesh out the clothing industry quite considerably and make things more interesting. Now we get into some more nitty-gritty modding and Lua updates. This first one doesn't mean much to me. Mods in the mod upload are now sorted by first ID. I presume things are now in numerical order and clearer, I hope. The delete buttons for saves have been replaced with a files button, which, when clicked, gives you a previous menu with a warning that delete is permanent and instant, with an extra button that opens the saves folder. You may also now click on mods in their various mod lists to open their folder. They added a logging for missing permitted reaction and permitted building objects. I don't know what that means, hopefully it's fixing something. The reactions associated with entities that use plant reagents will check that the entity has those plants when making powder lists. This is going to lead to less accidental canceled jobs. They changed how duplicate object message boxes work, making the canceled list and completed tasks list clearer. There's a possible improvement to the Linux message boxes, which I have checked. They don't look broken anymore, if that's what that's referring to. They added a dyer to the list of hard-coded buildings permitted for reactions. Nightmares no longer have boogeymen polymorphs, which is funny because boogeymen can polymorph into anything, so if nightmares could polymorph something into a boogeyman, then a boogeyman could polymorph into anything. Does that make sense? So like if a dwarf gets polymorphed into a sheep, then they're a sheep for a week, but if they get polymorphed into a boogeyman, then they could be whatever they feel like whenever they feel like it, which is kind of like you polymorph into a polymorph. Personally, I think that should be a feature, but I digress. Fixed angel sphere descriptions, so they were broken in the very last update and the one before, but they're fixed again, which is good. They fixed the attack tweaks for webs and forgotten beasts, and fixed necromancer animation manual input. I don't know what that means, but I will say the forgotten beasts and the angel sphere descriptions means you can now generate a new world because The beasts should function correctly again. All in all, that was a lot of fixes, as well as a pretty hefty new feature. Now we get into the general updates. This might be one of the biggest sets of patch notes I've seen this year. The general fixes include, they fixed an issue where not all save files are being copied to the right folder. I think I lost a save because of this, so that's great. Archers will no longer infinitely flick each frame between archery training and going to some other training if they have no ammo. They fixed problems causing armies to become stuck. Hallelujah. If you change your announcement settings on a save file, they should save properly now. They prevented potential crashes on startup. I haven't had a crash on startup in I don't remember how long, so that certainly wasn't affecting me. They removed dead and ghostly and caged and sleeping and paralyzed units from being able to become a noble, so you can no longer make a ghost a noble. I'm so sad I never made my Baron into a ghost. That is... If only I knew. If only I knew. Noble meetings auto-rebuff if the meeting data is lost. This means that, ideally, when your dwarves go to yell at somebody in charge and get their therapy sessions, these tasks won't get lost as often. I have noticed this, so it does seem to be more consistent now in my experimenting today. They improved and optimized memory management for armies and army controllers. I don't know what that means, but my frame rate was better today, and someone was saying that that probably is going to improve a lot of people's frame rates because it's an overworld thing. If that's true, that's cool. They optimized a particularly slow army loop, which, again, don't know what that means, but cool. And they fixed a crash associated to transformed creatures with fewer body parts than their untransformed body. Awkward. They fixed a view sheet hotkey for items and units, and fixed a placement of Titan shrines, meaning they should appear where they're supposed to be instead of just being invisible, I presume. Because there was instances where shrines would appear, but there wouldn't actually be anything there if you'd visit it in adventure mode or try to settle on top of it. They made work orders reset their suggested conditions properly when details are changed. They added some crash guards and logs for corrupted units and nemesis records. They made default embark cloth items dyeable. Wait, they weren't dyeable? That's wild. And they updated historical nicknames in more places so that Legends mode has them. And they added a fix for scrolling on laptop trackpads. They also fixed a typo in the Nemesis corruption image. This is a big patch. The other day I was actually kind of critiquing Dwarf Fortress for not being very good at putting out large patch notes. I think listing things in exhaustive details is good because then people get an idea that things are in fact being worked on. Things can be worked on as much as the developers want, but if they don't tell people, then people don't care, or they don't notice, or they presume nothing's being worked on, which is never a good situation. I think that these exhaustive patch notes, as well as sneaky features being added in sideways that aren't expected, are a welcome addition. I personally really like the changes that have been made to dyes, and the vast majority of the time I've spent with it has actually been in an old world, meaning the only dyes I currently have access to are the old ones, the old 4. Dimple dye, Silver Barb, Red Root, and whatever the other one is. But having messed around with the new stuff, it's quite interesting being able to use trees as dyes. It gives you more reason to go above ground, as well as giving you more reason to cultivate trees on the surface. It also, from what we can tell, you can currently sell tree dye clothing to elves, so it's a higher value trade good for elves, which is interesting. It's also just neat to be able to increase the value of clothing in more ways, because this will help satisfy that pesky acquire item need that a lot of dwarves so constantly crave. What do you think of this update? Have you messed around with the dyes stuff yet? And if you're just here to be told that you can in fact generate a new world now, yes, once again, yes you can. Now many of you, myself included, are also looking forward to those siege updates, but I'll have you know, the best features added to Dwarf Fortress are features that Tarn just happens to feel like making on a weekend. And that's often where the most interesting changes come in. If you've tried the dye system, let me know what you think to the changes in the comments section. I'd love to hear. But that's all from me today. For now, I will say if you haven't, do listen to my interview that I did with Putnam. I'll put a link in the description of this video. It was uploaded a couple days ago, and it talks about the future plans for the extent of the Dwarf Fortress mod support stuff, including full keyboard support and a fully customizable UI. But obviously, that's pretty far down the road. For now, I want to say goodbye, and I hope to see you in the next one.